Why am I not surprised?
Well, I have to tell you, this is the first time I've ever been called a rapporteur. Je parle français bien, but I never heard the word rapporteur. So I'll be one if that's what it takes. Okay. Just one moment while I get the... Elise, should we go through our original lists or go through them all or just the final? We didn't say. Okay. All right. Pull that off, please. Rip. No. Okay, this one and this one. Okay, I'm going to go through this and the list of people that should be included. Yeah, we'll go through those. And this was just sort of a quick arbitrary list. There's many ways we could have gone through this. We were talking about different policies. We didn't get to the point where we made any policies, but we know where there needs to be strong support for and/or development of policy. So we cite local, state, federal, and then tribal has to deal with all those levels. So we wrote that here, realizing that we couldn't sometimes just pigeonhole something into one of those places. At the local level, right now, outdoor wood boilers is an issue in Fairbanks. So that's something, if people could support that, we could get a policy about maybe they could go away. Toxic Free Children's Act is nearly ready to go. It's just on the edge of success. I feel it. All we need is that last push with legislators and key stakeholders to get it pushed through. And so that's a state level thing. I'm sure we'll give a full effort to very soon. And at the tribal level, sovereignty is an issue around which we need to make some good policy decisions so that everyone can come to the table on an equal footing and to be able to make progress where we need to make it. And did any one of our group want to add anything about sovereignty? We good? Okay. Then we just picked up crumb rubber. It's a type of thing they put under playgrounds when kids fall down, they fall on it. But it's not healthy. It's full of bad chemicals. So we thought that Alaska PIRG, which is a group policy regulation group, public interest research group, ACPIRG, is really trying to get going again, and that might be an issue that they could take up as because it's so pervasive for all children in playgrounds. At the federal level, we have the ACAT action plus the action of others on TSCA, and we really talked a lot about making sure we understood what it meant to protect the most vulnerable. What is that standard that takes us to the level of the greatest protection for children? And that includes pregnant women and children, Alaska Native children, all children. So then at the state level, we also we need to support, because we're very close to smoke-free workplaces. And the American Lung Association is working on that, but it's something we can all get behind and support. There's the issue of GMOs, and that spans the local, state, and federal level. We'd like to find out who's working on that and support that, or start some things if we need to. Resource extraction is another area where policy needs to be, we need to watch that very carefully at all three levels. And coal, yeah, thank you, Elise. The coal in the Mat-Su and other areas of the state. We have several, Point Lay and some of the others. So then tribal health and epidemiology, there needs to be increased policy for protective measures in that area. Pardon? Right, that's what we're going to go for next. So this list is by no means complete or inclusive. I'm sure we could add more. But we wanted to have teachers, aides, and curriculum developers, tribal groups, health economists, doctors, planners, clergy, women and mothers, action groups, public interest groups, nurses, public health persons, state and federal policymakers, green chemists, researchers with integrity, and I'm sure many others. But it's important to always remember who needs to be at the table, even if they aren't in our group, because if you want to get the best policy decisions made, you get the best and most input you can. And sorry, this is just, I'll just hold this up. We had some resources, tools, and strategies. We felt it was really important to take the tender consensus statement and use it absolutely everywhere we can, because there's such a problem with getting doctors and medical people to understand that research is real and that we're moving forward with the science behind us. Also, there was important idea that there's an imagery that imparts a tribal person's perspective on resource extraction. And I was going to ask Kathy if she could. Kathy, are you in here? Okay. Well, if she would expound on that. Should I try just a little bit? Okay. I'm going to try to say what Kathy said, but she said it so eloquently. If your mother had just recently passed away and she was buried in the ground, would you just allow someone to come in and reach down in there and pull out her decaying body? No, you wouldn't. So when you reach down through the layers of soil and earth, that is the place where all the people who have gone before us are laid to rest. They've become back part of Mother Earth. And so there is a level of respect that needs to be incorporated when you're doing extraction of resources and in places and in sacred places. And you can't know that if you're not communicating with the people who understand and have that knowledge. Okay. Then we came upon something I just thought was so interesting. I wanted to call it mitigation with mushrooms, but it's bioremediation with mushrooms. And it means that you can take and plant mushrooms in areas where there's PCBs and other chemicals, and they will actually uptake the toxic chemical and disseminate it or disaggregate it into its individual chemicals, and you don't have that bad chemical anymore. And so there's a lot of research going on for how to mitigate using that. So bioremediation with mushrooms is better all get it on your reading list. It's a top priority. Okay, thank you. Elise, is there anything else? Okay, thank you.
I would love it. Thank you. We were the researchers with integrity. There were just a few of us. But we talked about quite a bit, and I'm just going to focus on a few items. But you can see our messy thought process. One of the things we honed in on was the need for interventions, things that will actually improve our health in our homes, where we work, where we live, that are evidence-based. So maybe doing more research on what are good interventions. For example, should we buy new couches? What should we do with our old flame retardant couches? What role are our couches playing in our health? And we talked about mold as well as an area where we could use some good interventions, air filters that people would adopt in their homes. So the need for interventions. Thank you. All right. And then we thought about gaps in knowledge in the area of children's environmental health and what opportunities did Alaska present for addressing those gaps in knowledge. And we came up with climate change and children's environmental health as Alaska providing a unique opportunity to really look at the consequences of climate change on children's environmental health as chemicals are being released into the environment, as we experience melt, behaviors are changing, both of the chemicals where they've been interred for hundreds of years in the ice, and behaviors of people are changing to adapt, some not so easily. So what are the endocrine disrupting compounds that people are being exposed to as a result of climate change? So maybe there's a unique opportunity to establish a cohort across communities to look at the long-term effects of climate change while introducing interventions and adaptation strategies. Okay. Thank you. And in the process of developing any research with integrity, we talked about equity in research being critical to any research, and that would mean ownership of the data and real partnerships and sharing of power, and action-oriented outcomes. And so we talked about partnerships and expanding partnerships. And in terms of ACAT and our relationship with ACAT, we talked about thinking about how to respond to research requests that come into ACAT or questions. And if ACAT doesn't have the answers, where do they find the answers? What's their network of scientists and friends from New York to North Carolina, anywhere? So that's something that we could all work on together. And I think that's it in terms of all the things we were going to highlight. Oh, yeah, sorry. And then developing sort of a toolkit for rapid responses to such requests for assistance that come in, that would include building capacity. There's not a school of medicine in Alaska. So could we get more training of environmental health professionals here, students in different programs from the ground up? Anybody want to add from the Researchers with Integrity group? Oh, Carol. We have a little research to do on what a toolkit for rapid response would look like. No, would you like to explain?
Well, the one thing we talked about was the crumb, please. Really? I was trying to get Madeline to do this. The only example I have on the top of my mind is that, well, I guess I have a couple now have just come to mind, but rapid response things like the bracelets, the silicone bracelets that you can use now to measure what's in the air. Those are cheap, easy. There's a cost to analyzing the data, of course, but those are things that you could deploy quickly if there was an incident or there was a need. You could respond to immediately, and if these things were on hand, that would be very beneficial. Another example is that we didn't talk about, but it's the FLIR cameras, the infrared cameras that you can use to see releases into the environment. I guess that becomes a rapid response strategy more than something that's cheap and easy to deploy. But that's kind of what we talked about, is being able to respond to questions and requests that come into ACAT for things that they can do. That's it.
Yeah. You wouldn't be one of them. No, I mean, we've talked a lot about, thank you, Jesse. No, I think that was all we agreed we would highlight. So anyone want to take the mic from me? I have the floor. Say.
Thank you. The top one's first. Oh, I see how she's doing this. She's avoiding the microphone. Very slick, very slick. With my commuter shoes on, thank you. So we were the environmental group, but inevitably it was environmental health. And we had a good discussion. Really appreciate all of the, we appreciate everyone who jumped in and helped out. A nice group of very dedicated, focused people with some great ideas. So first we discussed some of the chief environmental health concerns that were being brought up in communities.
And some of the concerns we talked about were household products that pose health risks to the family. And these household products are store-bought.
And also those products that are marketed to and focused in for children and babies, and of course the chemicals of concern in those products.
We also talked about older homes, and it's not in every community, but there are still communities in Alaska that have older homes that were built in the 70s. And these homes still have that lead paint on their walls and also the asbestos, which are also concerns.
A lot of really good discussion around the concerns around solid waste management. So the landfills and the burning of trash in landfills and the various things that are being burned there, huge concerns and need to contain those and be much more effective in that process. We also talked about the need to have less trash and being much more, well, we get into some of that as far as the need to have more recyclable products and that type of thing. Of course, that's related to air quality overall. And there was some good discussion about concerns of different types of things that children are finding in their communities, i.e. old batteries, things that should not be littered anywhere, but certainly should not be accessible to children. So a lot of the community members did bring that up as a concern of, you know, obviously taking care of these things, getting rid of them appropriately, and definitely making sure they're not available for children to play with.
There was also a discussion on oil spills, and of course with the increased shipping in the Arctic and with oil spills being of a concern, a lot of these communities aren't prepared for an oil spill. So that was one concern where we should be sharing with our communities because they will impact our foods.
Discussions about what a lot of advocate groups are hearing, as far as also community leaders were bringing up concerns with the children and learning, as we've been hearing the last 2 days, behavioral issues, anger management issues, all of that being linked into a lot of the concerns we've been talking about at this summit.
I think indoor air quality and the cooking dust, that was another discussion. I think that one can go with the air quality up here with the solid waste management. They also talked about the old mines and former military bases. That's a lot of communities are familiar with that because ACAT does a lot of work with this area.
And a lot of discussion about where kids spend a lot of their time, homes, of course, and definitely schools. It was noted that childcare is definitely of interest, specifically in the urban environments, but not necessarily in the more rural, but was a point of interest. And when we're looking at schools in general or places of learning where kids are spending a lot of time, the products that are being used, as well as the cleaning products, a lot of them are for industrial type purposes and are not really, being utilized the way that they should or should be used at all. And obviously the overall air quality. We did have a discussion about pesticide use, and it was deemed that certainly it's of importance, and we want to encourage integrated pest management when possible, but that apparently it's not used as much here. In the summer months, maybe a little bit, but compared to all the other issues, maybe not as much of a concern as compared to some of the other states.
with climate change being an issue and that climate change is always going to be continual, it will affect our subsistence foods and our water supply. So that was something we did discuss, but we didn't have a real long discussion on it.
And then we had a conversation about existing resources, a need for solutions, who's a part. So we kind of combined some of those conversations into this sheet here. So a lot of discussion about increased need for education. And I would say that I would echo that even across the nation, but some specific community education initiatives. We talked about even the reality of how that's disseminated, and webinars might not necessarily be the best depending on remote access issues and that type of thing, but definitely teleconferences, webinars when possible, face-to-face meetings, of course, were ideal, and even online research opportunities. And we had a good discussion about many existing resources, tools, practices, toolkits that could be available for these type of discussions, and of course the need to probably raise some money for some of the face-to-face meetings and more of a coordinated educational outreach campaign in various arenas as deemed to be most of importance and priority after the summit.
With youth activities, and if I'm speaking for the communities in our villages, when we involve youth in our activities, it can be under your environmental programs. And you can do things like make your own safe household products. It could be anything from safe household cleaners and your own mayonnaise and ketchup, stuff like that. And then you can get your youth involved with creating flyers as outreach materials so that they can share that with their families at home and their community.
Yeah, but when we had discussions about some of the lessons learned from other states that have been successful in some product bans, especially those containing high levels of chemicals of concern. So it was discussed that there could be an opportunity here where maybe we don't see in other larger or states that have more retailers, where you have limited a number of retailers here in the state, and it may hopefully offer up an opportunity to work with them in a more concerted way and to make the case that, i.e. they don't bring in some of these, or they're much more resistant to bringing in some of the products that are containing some of these chemicals, as well as the longer term goals of trying to ban some of these chemicals in the first place from even entering products and retailers' shelves in the state.
And again, with banning products in your communities, again, you would work with your tribe. If there was an issue that occurred in your community, you can work with your tribe, and with the tribe can help create a letter where, for instance, one year with ACAT, they set out like a newsletter or something through their email. And I remember one time, I think it was in 2011, there was an email, and it was to support the banning of HB 295, which was that flame retardant. And I remember sitting there in the fall storm writing that letter supporting the banning of 295.
I should mention also, in coordination with a lot of this, there was an elephant in the room that was very frank and discussed, which was good and healthy, I think, that there's this feeling that, in reality, that many of the rural communities are kind of seen as the second-class citizen. They don't really get the attention, the resources, capacity, as well as combined with some of the rural areas that Albuquerque is kind of the first, and then maybe the other two larger cities maybe in second place, and then all the others kind of fall distant behind. So that was just kind of the underlying backdrop to this too, that as we're thinking about solutions, we want to be fair and equitable, and making sure that we even maybe go out of our way to be making sure that those rural communities get, some of their fair share of attention here. And so a lot of good discussion as well in that same discussion also about educating our public health leaders and recognizing, and this is true in other parts of the country, that there are many of those working in public health that don't even almost acknowledge that they're working in, or that what they're doing is environmental public health, and that in many cases, aside from the leaders that we've also had here with us at the summit, that there was an honest revelation that there's always room for improvement, always room for growth. So there could be education opportunities even within some of those staff members at some of the agencies as far as building rapport, listening more. There was an example about how sometimes at community events or forums, when community members are asked, are trying to get some feedback and trying to get some help and support, that the answer is always stop smoking, stop drinking. Okay, but we're talking to you about this issue over here about our rivers and our what? Stop smoking and stop drinking. So there, in some regards, and it was not a gross generalization, but there have been some concerns with people not listening. And if you can't even listen to each other, you can't even get to any of these wonderful solutions and offers. So some just basic common decency in that regard, but also the need, not only community, not only some of the opportunities within the tribes, but also definitely at the public health level, there's some needs to be a little bit more effective with education and training as well. And finally, also recycling centers, the availability of recycling centers across the state, and making that a priority, and thinking about, I know in other parts of the country, youth have been extremely important in making sure that recycling programs have been successful, quite frankly, in guilting adults into doing better. And that also could be an opportunity maybe to bring our younger generations involved in making sure that we do better with recycling in the state. Any other members of the work group that want to join in at any points we might have missed? Okay, good. Good job. There's one more group right, yeah.
So we had a really lively discussion. It was okay. I don't know if we need. Do we need to go through our thought process to begin with? It might take a while. You think we do?
Yeah, go ahead and do that.
Okay. So it's so bright. So I think the concerns that as we were talking about what the issues are with healthcare in Alaska, why healthcare providers aren't assessing for environmental health exposures, not getting involved in policy issues, a lot of it came down to education around environmental health. And there was also a lot of concerns that the healthcare wasn't as holistic as it could be, and not taking into account a lot of the traditional ways around assessing for health issues, that the disproportionate health impacts in the Native community weren't being addressed properly. And so I think those were a lot of the concerns. Did I miss any pieces with that? I think that's...
Somebody else brought it up too, around that structural, systemic kind of things we have to address.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about power imbalances, it's all over the place, not
Mhm.
just here.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, and then another thing that I thought was interesting here is there's so many health providers that are employed by the government, and so whether it's like the health department or different governmental agencies, and so you have these conflicts of interest around how they're able to speak out on issues. I don't think we came up with a good way to address that, but
No, we didn't.
no. That's for the next summit. We'll keep working on that.
So you're
Yeah.
done with this one?
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
And we talked a lot about education. I think that was one of the main themes. And I love this. One of the ideas was we need to start talking about environmental health with the we guys. And so it's just threading up. It becomes natural. I used the recycling example as well. That, you know, when the kids then bring that home, it just becomes just natural to be thinking about our environment around us every day.
And there was a lot of talk earlier about blaming the, there was a lot of talk earlier about how our health systems tend to blame the patient. Stop smoking, who was saying that? Stop smoking, stop drinking, you know, those kinds of things. When really there should be in place a system to evaluate whether or not there are environmental exposures, and if that should be a consideration in somebody's health as well. Of course it should, but our systems don't allow for that the way they're built right now.
And just how, you know, when you're talking to someone who's just trying to survive, when they can't even feed their family, and trying to talk to them about some of these environmental issues, it can be a real challenge because they have other more immediate issues that they're needing to take care of. So then we figured out how to address all of these things very quickly and easily. So one of the things we actually thought we could do quickly and easily was to create some CEUs for health providers and CME. Another thing, like with the public health nurses, they all have to go through an orientation to include some environmental health pieces in that. So it starts building it into some of these systems. And if you want to talk through it.
So I think I'm the only physician here today. One cool thing about Alaska is the healthcare here, even though it's affiliated with the Indian Health Service, is owned by the Alaska Native people. And so ultimately, decisions that get made about healthcare, whether they're Western or traditional, are ultimately kind of made from the ground up. And so just making sure that leadership within the Alaska Native community represents the views that they should have, rather than just their own views. And we talked about doing sort of assessments in the waiting rooms. Basically, there's all kinds of environmental assessments that can be made in terms of like well child exams, or screening for people when they have allergies or asthma. And what was our last one here? New audiences. I'm not sure, but the other thing that we talked about, as a physician, time is always the thing that we bring up when we are forced to or want to do something more. But having a method for organizations that advocate for this kind of work, and connecting them with physicians who want to advocate for this kind of work, but making it easy. So having specific bills that come up at specific times, having a group of physicians who'd be willing to speak to them, going to Juneau or here in Anchorage, in a way that we don't have to sort of do any extra work. We can just show up and do the speaking, because ultimately that's going to be more helpful for physicians to get involved. I think that's most of it. Some of these just sort of recap what we already mentioned. We talked a little bit about traditional medicines. I know at least at South Central, we have traditional healers, and they're across the state sort of incorporated into the healthcare system. But there are issues and rules that kind of restrict what they're able to do. And so, again, advocating to leadership what the demands are and what people want is really important. And there's all kinds of issues around giving out traditional plants in clinics because of the whole commercialization issue, not wanting to drive a sort of supply or agricultural system around native plants is really important. And so we talked about some of those controversies and challenges.
wanted to share a little bit about how we have representation. That's not an issue. You know, we have Alaska Native people, and I know this is not just an Alaska Native conference, but it's a lot of what we talked about. There are Alaska Native representatives on pretty important policymaking boards. But what we're finding is, and it's been my personal experience, I guess I should say it that way, that these boards are presented with a menu of options to vote yay or nay on. And they might be given the impression that those are the only options, but those are only the options that were made available to them from the whole, you know, gamut of options out there available, presented by their executive staff or by their, you know, whoever. So it's important that we include those executive staff members in our discussions about environmental health and about health care. So I just wanted to share that.
Great. That's it.
Ooh, that's bright. I don't know which is worse, going first or last. I'm Samantha, and I work at South Central Foundation, a Native-owned primary health care center for the South Central region, and I used to work at ACAT as their policy coordinator, and now I'm just an ACAT groupie. I had the honor of facilitating our group today, the education and outreach, and I worked with some lovely ladies from Puerto Rico, Elam, Savunga, Unalakleet, Anchorage, and Seattle. Unfortunately, we didn't have any male perspectives, which is pretty typical, I think, for communications. So there may be some parts missing, but I think we covered a lot. And although we had an official scribe, I was a secondary scribe, so you can't read any of this, but this is what I'll be going off of. We had 6 questions, and we tried to address it on 1 page. And we spent most of the first session discussing which children's environmental health issues are most important, and we really couldn't separate the puzzle of environmental and social factors that have a cumulative impact. So we really appreciated the last presentation today from the Collaborative on Health and the Environment and their systems approach to health promotion and disease prevention. A lot of what she went over really resonated with our group. So when we're discussing education and outreach, we had to think, you know, on a human level, what makes people care, what's going to make them act. You know, so we listed the top 4. We had a large list of important audience members, and we narrowed it down to the top 4 and who's connected. And we, first of all, we had parents. Not only do they protect their children, there's also, you know, a lot of parent-to-parent connections. Healthcare professionals, students, and policymakers. And, you know, most of the time they have dual roles. A policymaker can be also a nurse or a doctor. They can be a parent. And then they'll listen to each other. Students teach their parents. Parents teach their children. Their healthcare professionals will explain things to policymakers, and so they're often connected in more than one way. And we tried to identify those influential voices, you know, who's most affected, and these messengers, we have a large list, and so I'll kind of just go through that. For the parents, we've had a lot of successful stories in villages for informative community-run meetings. So that's an opportunity for parents in the community to get together and discuss the most important issues that are that they're currently faced with. Their own children and each other, their spouses. If you're gonna, you know, change your behavior, you're probably going to listen to your kid or if anyone's nagging you. You trust your healthcare provider, doctors. Also at tribal meetings, when you have tribal leadership or elders telling you information, you're definitely going to stop and listen. And also Facebook. I don't know how many people will see something and they're like, hey, did you see that on Facebook? I didn't know that was happening. And you kind of stop what you're doing and question it at the very least. Healthcare professionals, they will listen to their peers, other doctors, other health aides in other regions or villages. There's some continuing education opportunities also. Conferences, presentations such as today. I don't know how many healthcare professionals we have in the room. And also the alliances that they may be a member of. Pediatricians, the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments. So if you have nurses that are a part of that group, then you have already this avenue to give them updated messages. Students, we had 2 women from the Region 10 office for the EPA in Seattle, and they informed us, which I was completely unaware of, a complete, fully integrated curriculum for levels, grades 1 through 3, 4 through 6, and then so on. And it's 100% free. They even have posters. It's a 3-month series of class lessons, and that's available. And they did have specific examples of districts and teachers who have incorporated it successfully. And so that is just one resource on hand that's ready. And we also discussed, some of us have kids that are at camp where they end up learning a lot. Just the dinner table, again, that shared information. What are you discussing at your dinner table over dinner with your parents or your elders, your siblings? And I think the most memorable for students are local hands-on activities, whether they're collecting specimens from the creek and, there's less of them now, or, you can make these connections with the environment. And policymakers, how can we get them to do anything? I don't know. Oh, I do know, okay. Constituents. I mean, your vote matters. You can complain about something, but unless you call them up and be like, hey, I really think you should be doing this. Did you know this? Like, I have other people that feel this way. Sometimes they are donors, which is great. And they will generally listen to larger groups if you're organized, school teachers, parent groups, PTA. You can share those personal stories, and that's what they're going to remember. Be like, I used to be your 2nd grade teacher, and I'm so ashamed of what you're doing now, or something. Health communities, the midwives, pediatricians, nurses, they're all trusted. And when you're organized like that and you go into the office and you discuss business, you can be surprised with the results. Any businesses, we always love getting more businesses on board, money talks, labor organizations, unions, firefighters. We try to keep that in mind when we're discussing new research and projects. What groups, how can we connect those groups? We also spent the other half of the time identifying existing opportunities and resources and ones we'd like to see. And I think what was most surprising from the EPA ladies is just how much actually already exists. That includes print materials, hard copies, and also electronic. But just like this conference today, there's tons of statewide conferences. ATCOMS, there's School Health Wellness Conference, BIA providers, which was unfortunately postponed or canceled, AFN, Elders and Youth. But they even handed us all these checklists and posters and printed materials that they have, which they're willing to distribute for free. They have podcast links for clean air, videos about mold. Pretty much if you Google EPA Region 10, you'll come up with, it'll show up in that search. And they even suggested we connect people to the ANTHC Tribal Air Facebook page. And I work at South Central Foundation, and I happen to control the Facebook page, and I work with ANTHC. And so it just kind of shows you that, and we all agree, there is a consensus that in the villages in Anchorage, Facebook is the easiest way to distribute information. So, I mean, we would like to see more social marketing, which has this aspect where you're going to change behavior. Whether it's like a campaign that's cheap, sponsored content is really cheap on Facebook, you like, share, tag. There's a 7th generation training curricula that for all environmental health workers, if we could have some influence in that. Teachers or youth summits. I think most industries have understand that you can get things in the school, you can plant this seed, have this positive influence even if it's not a positive topic, and then they'll grow up kind of with that in the back of their mind. So I think we could do a lot more to influence that. And I was really impressed by the e-storytelling and the infographics. So there's a lot of potential for just electronic short storytelling and local radio in the village. Both of those two are really key. And I think we had a few more things, but I'd like to thank ACAT and everyone else who's involved in this conference. It's really impressive. This has been just one of the best, most memorable days of presentations and relationship building that I've had. And also, I'd like to thank my group and invite them to share any additional thoughts. And give yourselves a round of applause. Just do it. Yeah. Woo. Okay.